Okay, so in this screencast, what we're going to do is we're going to learn how to call functions in MATLAB. So this could be either built-in functions, functions that are already programmed into MATLAB, or the functions that you program yourself and make them into MATLAB. So to call a function, we follow a very general format, and it looks something like this. So you can see that on the left hand side over here you have variables that are going to be at your outputs, and then you have this equal sign, and then to the right of it you have function name, and in parentheses you have your input variables. So this is the general format that we'll be following when we call functions in MATLAB. Now notice how it says O1, O2, O3, comma, dot, dot, dot. So you can have as many output variables as your function allows, and your function also requires a certain number of input variables. So before we get into detailed examples, let's answer some questions. So say if say you have a function and it's called airplane control. It accepts two input variables and it returns one output variable. What would your line of code look like? So essentially what we're going to do is we're going to take this line of code and modify it for our own situation. So in this case, the first thing we do is we look at the number of outputs we have. So the problem tells us that we have one output right here, right? So we look at our general equation and we essentially do what we do in our general equation. So we write O1 is assigned, so you put an equal sign because there's an equal sign here, so you put an equal sign here. And on the right hand side, the first thing you put is the file name. So in this case, our function name or the file name is airplane control. So instead of function name, what we're going to put in our case is airplane control. So you write airplane control, so play piece of capital. MATLAB is case sensitive, so you have to follow proper procedure. And then what it does, it accepts two input. So here we, in parentheses, we could send it multiple inputs. So that's exactly what we're going to do here, except in our case we'll send it two inputs because it only accepts two inputs. So we'll call it I1, I2. So this is how you call a function in MATLAB. So what we're doing is we're calling the function airplane control. We're sending it two variables, and then what the function will do is it will give us one output, O1. Now let's look at another example. If you have, once again, a function called airplane control that accepts three inputs, K1, K2, and K3 respectively, and what it does, it returns two outputs, A1 and A2. What would the line of code look like in this case? So let's go back to our general line of code for calling functions in MATLAB. So here you see that on the left hand side we have to have our outputs. The problem statement tells us that we have two outputs called A1 and A2. So inside the brackets here you put your outputs A1, comma, A2. So those are our outputs, and then you put an equal sign right here. So you put an equal sign, and then what you say is you say airplane, because that's your airplane control. Right here you put your function name. In our case the function is airplane control, and then inside the parentheses you have your inputs. In our case our inputs are K1, K2, and K3, so we'll put K1, K2, and K3 here. So this is how you call this function with three input variables and two output variables. Now there are two places where you can call a function. You can call a function in a script, which is all of this right here. This is where we're typing. We're typing in the script. You can either call it there, or if you want, you can call the function here by simply copying the same line of code, and you can paste it right here in the command window, and you'll get the same answer, assuming that you have a function called airplane control in your folder. So that's how you go about calling functions in MATLAB. Now let's do an example problem. So here we're given a matrix that with 15 values of temperature. So you have 15 different temperature values in this matrix, and what we want to do is we want to find, for each column, we want to find the minimum temperature value. Now to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to use the help tool. Help is a built-in tool in MATLAB that allows you to look up functions and see what they do. If a function is already built into MATLAB, then you can use the help tool. If not, then you cannot use it. So in this case, you will say help min in the command window, and what it does is that it essentially gives you instructions on how to use the function and what the function does. Now if you look right here at this line, it gives you a syntax, or it tells you the format of how you're going to use the min function. So for a second, I'm going to copy and paste it onto my script. So paste. Now what X here represents is what you're sending MATLAB. Now the goal is once again to find the minimum value for each column for this matrix of temperature values. So what we'll send MATLAB is temp values. So this is our input, and this are outputs. This is what MATLAB will give back to us. So Y represents the minimum values, so we'll say min temps, so minimum temperature values for each column, and then we'll say row val, so this will indicate where in each row, for each column, which row contains the minimum value. Now if you save and run the program, you see that you get 64 for your first column as your lowest value, and let's compare them. So 64, 70, and 71, those are your three values. So 64 is clearly the smallest value, and it is in row 1, so it is in fact in row 1. Now let's go to column 3. So your three values are 79, 80, and 78. So 78 should be your lowest value, so it is your lowest value. Okay, now let's look at the row number. So it's not in row 1, it's not in row 2, it's in row 3, so you should have a 3 here. So that is how you use a min function in MATLAB. But for the purpose of this video, what you should focus on is the syntax of calling a function outputs. So the takeaway from this video should be that this right here is the general format of calling a function. On the left hand side of the equal sign, you have your input, you have your output variables, and then you have on the right hand side you have the function name, and then right after that you have parentheses, and inside the parentheses you have your input variables. So if you remember this general line of code, you'll be able to call any function in MATLAB. And for practice, you should try to do the same for max function. Try to use a max function and do what we did with the min function. Thank you for watching.